Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back with another video from Annie News, and today we're continuing with the cut content series for DanMachi Season 4. Absolutely loving it, it's so good. If you're not onto it, you need to get onto it. DanMachi Season 4 is absolutely boss. And we're checking out the grim future awaiting Belle and the Hestia Familia-DanMachi Season 4, Episode 13, cut content. Let's see what's been left out, shall we?
With Season 4 being extremely faithful to the material it's covering, there aren't many
That's
major
good to know.
cutscenes with which I can talk about.
Okay.
Where the anime does fall a bit behind, though, are the inner thoughts that really add to the tension of these desperate situations.
Oh my god, it's so desperate.
Like, you don't really see just how close Belle was to falling into madness until you realize that he was literally hearing the dungeon laugh at him.
Oh, that's dark. That's real dark. Oh, mate, because it seems so tense anyway. That is... Oh, mate, cool.
So, as we look at things like that and the additional action from the Amphispina fight, I hope I can add a bit more context to exactly what everyone's been going through. Episode 13, Morgue. Covering chapters 7 and 9 from volume 14 of the light novel.
It's interesting how they don't just do it in sequence sometimes. It's always interesting to see that. I like that, where it's like, you know, they've missed something out in between to then throw in a different way. Like they do with Overlord. It's all over the place.
Jumping straight back into Belle's dire situation, with the Juggernaut right behind him hunting his prey, Belle was going as fast as he could to try and lose it. He was constantly changing directions, traveling down whatever branching corridors were available to him. Despite there being significant risk of reaching a dead end or perhaps another monster,
they are creepy. Those goat things are creepy.
Escaping the Juggernaut was all that mattered now. So, as he ran to the sound of footsteps approaching ever closer, Belle's mind started its descent into a panic unlike anything he'd ever experienced before. His mind filled with doubt as it questioned what the best course of action was.
You are in the lower floors. Like, you're pretty screwed where you're at, like.
Then, with all sorts of pain preventing his brain from thinking clearly, the only thing Belle could rely on was his experience. He had unconsciously begun a charge in preparation for the inevitable encounter with the opponent.
It was cool to see that he was doing that.
One that lasted 20 seconds before finally being cast as a desperate attempt at defending himself. Belle didn't visually see that the Juggernaut was that close, but its increasingly potent bloodlust was more than enough for him to know exactly when it was right behind
so he could sense it, right?
leading to an attack that actually struck fear straight into the core of the Juggernaut.
Whoa.
As the only move to have ever damaged it, it makes sense that this luminescent glow would be one of the things that it would run from.
Oh yeah, you'd be
In
worried.
fact, it was the only reason it had decided to take evasive action in the first place. It was genuinely scared of getting hit by Belle's Argonaut.
Oh wow, okay, cool.
Now, although Belle's moves may have seemed calculated, the only reason his firebolt had hit
desperate.
the ceiling was because his immense fatigue wouldn't allow him to absorb the recoil of it. His arm was too damaged to fully take the kickback like how it usually did.
That's sick. So like he can't like, oh mate.
So, although it did end up saving them from the Juggernaut, it really was nothing more than luck that the passageway had ended up like
He
this.
does have a high luck stat.
Now, what the anime didn't show after this was just how close to mind down Belle really was here. You see, with
get
that
slapped
last
out of
Argonaut
it.
having used whatever mental and physical strength remained, Belle could no longer fend off the desire to just close his eyes and rest. As much as he wanted to pick himself back up, the overwhelming sensation of tiredness was just too inviting for him. So, unless Ryu had gone and called his name in this exact moment, Belle likely would have succumbed to mind down and met his end right here.
Damn.
If you're wondering why he was able to push that aside, well, that's because Ryu's soft voice had reminded him of what was at stake here. He was reminded that it wasn't just his life that he was responsible for.
They gotta look after each other,
Ryu
man.
being at death's door as well, Belle remembered that him passing out would mean the death of both of them. And that was something he promised himself he'd never let happen again. Ever since that incident with Wine, Belle promised he'd get stronger so he could protect everyone.
With Wiener.
It's a significant part of his development that stems from the events of Season 3. Now, when the Skull Sheep had first made its appearance, its seemingly floating mask had led Belle to believe it was the Grim Reaper first. He thought perhaps death had finally come to guide them to the afterlife. Once its footsteps had revealed otherwise, though, that's when Belle finally saw it was a Skull Sheep. An unusual creature belonging to a larger family of skeleton monsters.
They are weird,
With
man.
their defining traits being their lack of flesh, skin, or organs, the most well-known were the monsters called Spartois. Skeletal warriors whose fearsome strength became known even to the lowest tier adventurers. As for the Skull Sheep in particular, these were typically referred to as death hermits, mainly due to the unique way in which they tend to hunt. First, they terrify their prey with the chilling clack of their bones, then they slowly creep up and devour them. They were excellent hunters whose blackened skin allowed them to blend perfectly into the darkness.
Yeah, they just casually just walk out of the shadow, man. So weird.
That's right. This wasn't fur that covered its body from head to toe, but instead folds of skin that acted like a robe. It was the key thing preventing Bell from knowing where its attacks would come from. Since he usually relied on visual information to know when an opponent was to attack, this Skull Sheep was a whole new type of enemy that tested his very limits. Beating it properly would require more than just intuition and fast reflexes. It was after Bell had managed to luck his way out of that too that we then get to his refusal to leave Ryu. A
Those high
passionate
luck
outburst
stats,
that
man.
carried with it the weight of everything he stood for.
I love it. It's like, yeah, okay, it's all good that you're trying to be nice, but I kind of can't do this by myself. You've been here before. I need you to also help me out, please.
The reason he was getting so worked up was because to abandon Ryu would mean to stop being himself. It would contradict every single thing he stood for as a person, ultimately rendering him unable to rescue anyone ever again. So, when Bell had given all those reasons to keep Ryu by his side, they were actually nothing more than unconscious ramblings intended to convince Ryu her presence was crucial, eventually resulting in the one that actually made sense to them. Ryu wasn't entirely convinced her knowledge of the deep floors was necessary, but the decision she needed to make ultimately came down to this. Was it better to free Bell from the dead weight of her injuries, or instead become the brain that would lead him forward? That was the crucial choice Ryu was contemplating here. Now, after giving her first order to find a room, the reason that was so important was because it prevented the spawn of monsters. You see, if they damage the walls and close themselves in, then for a period of time the dungeon won't spawn any new monsters on them.
Yeah, it starts focusing time on healing its walls and its surroundings before then spawning in monsters, doesn't it?
It would instead prioritize repairing itself
Yeah.
over creating new ones. So, this was the perfect plan to provide them with a little bit of rest. The thing about that, though, was that Bell was still concerned with what would come after. Like, sure, they'd get a bit of rest and perhaps
But
even some
what's
energy back,
next?
but in the grand scheme of things, their situation wouldn't really have improved at all. How would they plan to get back from the deep levels? Would they really be able to make it back to the surface?
I am
These were the types
intrigued.
of thoughts that Bell's mind was being
I'm very
clouded by.
intrigued to see what happens. Like,
So, as he pushed those to the side in search of a room, it was the following scene with the decrepit
Oh, no.
adventurers that brought them back and even made things worse. After having their only thread of hope get yanked away so quickly, the mental toll of such revelation was leading Bell straight to the depths of insanity. First, he started to hear the skeletons as if they were mocking him, then
God.
shortly after he began to hear the dungeon laughing at
oh
him.
no.
The former was urging him to join them as if it was his fate, while the
That's-
latter confirmed that that was the only fate awaiting him.
That is dark.
Then, as if to fully break his spirit in the most perfect way possible, the light went out, bringing absolute darkness, and 3 more skull sheep could be heard approaching from the shadows. It was the perfect storm of events needed to fully envelop Bell in the fear he was struggling just to suppress. So, after panic firing those 5 shots of firebolt to scare them off, the mental fatigue of doing so had left Bell empty. It took
So
everything
desperate.
within him just to prevent himself from fainting. But with no strength left to even move a finger, Bell was once again ready to give in to the darkness. He didn't remember where he was or what he was doing, but the burden of being trapped in an endless maze made giving in feel so much more enticing, leading Ryu to resort to what we saw in the anime. Now, just as I'm sure you questioned the usefulness of a mere 5 minutes, so too did Bell think the same. To him, 5 minutes didn't seem like much no matter how strong of an adventurer you were.
Yeah, I was a bit like, 5 minutes, that's nothing, but go on.
But just as he was about to voice those doubts, Ryu answered with words very familiar to those once spoken by his idol. You see, back when Bell had done that training with eyes, she too had mentioned how sleeping anywhere and recovering quickly was important.
She needs
Bell
to come
never
back into
fully
it at some
believed
point, man.
that was something he'd have to rely on, but after today it was clear that he should have. So, more than anything, these next 5 minutes were about to be a test for him. A test that carried their very lives in the balance. Now, just as how Bell found his merit as an adventurer tested, so too were the Hestia Familia
Mate.
being tested as well.
Oh my god, this was so good when they fought this floor boss. It was so sick.
But in addition to the skills and teamwork they needed to apply to this, more than anything theirs was a test of endurance. Since even a concerted barrage of magic wasn't enough to one-shot it, a fight with the Ampus Bino was usually a waiting
Oh
game.
my god, so cool.
Unless your party was extremely overleveled, the general strat for beating it was to just chip away at it. So, with a party that was both under-leveled and undermanned,
Yeah, there's
that
hardly
put the
any of them
current
for a
group at
floor boss.
seemingly insurmountable disadvantage. Like, not only did they not have a magic user to provide artillery fire from the back, but Welf's offensive sword magic was already at its limit too. That being the case,
Use it
it was
up.
only natural the fate of the party rest in the hands of the casters that were supporting them. Specifically Haruhime and the level
Oh
boosts she
my
provided.
god, yes.
By the time we had jumped back into the action in the anime, Haruhime had already cast her level boost 3 times over. She was rapidly draining potions in order to be ready for when her spell's 10-minute cooldown was up. This was a little bit worrying to Lily, but assuming the Amphispina didn't have any special properties like the Goliath Irregular, there was still hope for this Monster Rex to be beaten. The only thing they really needed to look out for right now was the blue napalm that could set fire to anything.
Yeah, even the
That
water.
and its inability
Even
to be
the
put out
water.
through natural extinguishing was extremely terrifying.
Damn. Oh,
Of
so that
course,
makes
there did
sense.
exist remedies that
That explains that then. I like that, because I was like, why didn't you just put it out? But, right, it can't be right.
countered it, but with one being a magic potion produced by the greatest healer in Arario, and the other a magic item created by Perseus,
Cool.
coming into possession of them was
I
extremely
like this stuff being explained. This
The
is sick.
former was usually only sold to upper tier adventurers, and the latter was more of a secret item limited to use by the Hermes Familia. You see, because the Hermes Familia lies about their level and the floors they've been to, they can't just go around buying potions made solely for beating the Amphispina.
Yeah.
So, when Asphi had first come across this two-headed dragon, she had set out to develop an antidote of her own for it, resulting in this item that didn't heal like how the potion did, but it did extinguish flames no matter how strong they were, making that and the potion the only 2 counters currently available. So, with Lily not being in possession of either, it was only natural she'd want everyone to avoid it. I mean, one hit and it was pretty much game over. Now, with Haruhime's level boost lasting for a total of 15 minutes, that meant there was a 5-minute overlap in which a 5th person could be given a level boost.
Right.
The actual process was extremely strenuous for Haruhime, but the only thing that mattered to her was everyone's survival. If providing multiple level boosts ensured that
Means
that's what happened,
pushing
then
someone out the
Haruhime
way,
had no
getting
problem pushing herself
covered in that
forward to do
napalm.
so.
Bloody hell.
It was an act of determination far different from what Aisha was used to. The young girl who'd once lamented the world she'd lived in was now doing all she could to maintain the new one she'd found. So Aisha was genuinely happy that Haruhime had changed so much. Now, if Haruhime was the support providing all the defenses, then Mikoto was the scout providing recon.
She is so
Her
sick
and her
in this
ability
fight.
to track where the Amphispina was going was just as useful as Haruhime and her level ups. Combine this with Welf's ability to create footholds, and those would be the 2 assets providing the upper hand right now. So much so that they were actually making a visible dent to the dragon's health. Whereas it initially started the fight with raging breaths of napalm, its flames were only coming out as ragged puffs now. It had taken so much damage that a normal one would have already retreated to recover itself underwater. Because this Amphispina was an irregular though, it ignored its natural instincts to keep itself alive and instead focused solely on slaughtering the adventurers in front of it.
Mate, it looks so good.
Long as there was a chance they could escape, Aisha knew this dragon wouldn't retreat. What no one in the room went to expect, though, was the desperate move their opponent would try and do next. It was an attack that no one even knew was possible from it. Since all parties would usually fight it in a smaller room with islands, there had never been an instance of a group fighting it in the Great Falls like this.
Right.
So, when it rushed up the waterfall and launched itself down, there wasn't a single person ready to defend against it, resulting in a torrent of damage exactly like how we saw in the anime. When the Amphispina returned and started shooting napalm everywhere,
Mate.
the reason Cassandra stood still wasn't
She's
because
just-
she had given up again,
Oh,
but
okay.
was instead because she had been knocked out by the tsunami.
Oh,
You see, when the waves washed up on
right. That was very different then. That is interesting. She, in the anime, is definitely just stood there because she's given up. If that's the case in the original, then that is a very interesting change, that.
shore and brought all the ice with it, Cassandra had used her own body to shield Lily and Haruhime. She had exposed her back and protected the others while they were being
That's
washed.
very different.
It's not like she was rendered unconscious, but she did take a heavy hit to the back from a chunk of ice, which by the time Lily had helped her recover from, the Amphispina was already shooting its fire at them, leading Haruhime to jump in and save them.
Right, that is so different.
Unlike how the anime had made it seem as if Cassandra had given up again,
Yeah.
she had actually done quite the opposite. There were no words about being
Wow.
consumed by despair, just 0 time to react after having been hit by the tsunami. Now, with Aisha being on the cusp of despair herself, her instincts wouldn't allow her to sob no matter how much she wanted to. As an ordinary person, she definitely felt the burden of losing her friend, but at the same time, her Amazonian
Excuse me.
stubbornness refused to let her show weakness. So, despite her fists trembling with emotion, the only thing to come from it was anger,
She's sick.
bringing us now to the end of the episode. But yeah, that's pretty much everything from the second
Wow.
episode of Season 4, Part 2.
That is very interesting. Not a lot of changes. Very interesting though with the magic caster where she's just stood there, and in the anime it did really make it look like she had just given up and was being all like, "Oh, woe is me," but in reality she got knocked out. That's a big difference. That's a very big difference. I think that's quite interesting. And knowing Belle's like how far the floors are pushing him mentally, very interesting. And oh damn, Machi man, if you're not watching it, get on it. It's so freaking good. And anyway, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, link in the description of the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I ask to support the channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you guys very much for that. And thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe, and leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys, all you guys, next time.